Welcome back to late edition Beat Chronicles. My name is Terry Lipschutz, and I'm one of the behind-the-scenes producers of the program. We're currently working on the next set of episodes that will look at the 1990 death of 20-year-old Susan Nesersmith in Wildwood, New Jersey. Until then, please go back and listen to past seasons if you have not already. Lee Enterprises produces other podcasts such as The Ethical Life, a program that focuses on the intersection of ethics and the modern life. The show is hosted by Scott Rada, Lee Enterprises social media manager, and Richard Kyte, director of the Ethics Institute at Viterbo University in La Crosse, Wisconsin. A recent episode of The Ethical Life is of particular interest to listeners of late edition Beat Chronicles, as it looks at the appeal of true crime programs. True crime is one of Hollywood's most successful genres. Recently, Netflix aired a 10-part series about Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee serial killer, and it was a huge hit. But the sister of one of Dahmer's victims said it's sad the producers are making money off the tragic events that happened more than 3 decades ago. Richard Kyte and Scott Rada discuss why true crime is so popular and why such disturbing stories have a strong appeal. A link to the episode, What is So Appealing About True Crime Shows, is available in the show notes so you can listen to the full conversation and check out other topics from The Ethical Life.
True crime is one of Hollywood's most successful genres. Most recently, Netflix aired a 10-part series about Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee serial killer who killed 17 men and boys. It was a huge hit. But many of those who were affected by the crime were upset that they weren't consulted about the show, and they aren't interested in watching it. The sister of one of Dahmer's victims said it's sad that the producers are making money off the tragic events that happened more than 3 decades ago. Rick, why do you think so many people find such disturbing stories so interesting?
You know, I'm not entirely sure, because I think as long as there's been storytelling about kind of the horrific, about, things that frighten us. I think part of us is simply drawn towards the monstrous. If we're living in a society, we're living in the context where we're always being required to repress many of our urges, and there's a curiosity. What would it be like to give in to those urges, not to have any of that repression? And yet, at the same time, we really don't want to live in a society where everybody gives into those urges. It really would not just scary, it would be downright dangerous and deeply unsettling. And so stories allow us both to, in our imagination, give in to the urges and eliminate the repression and kind of imagine what that's like, but also have the satisfaction of knowing that those who do such things get punished. And that's part of the storytelling, especially with true crime stories, is to pretty much always find the criminal and they get punished.
We started off this episode by talking about the Jeffrey Dahmer series on Netflix. And full disclosure, I wasn't really planning on watching that series. But last week, I came down for the first time. And since we've had COVID, I was like one of the last people to finally get COVID. And that meant I ended up on the couch for a few days, not feeling the best. And knowing this show was coming up, I figured, well, at least I'll watch the first episode, and maybe I'll watch the first 2. And partially because I didn't feel like doing a whole lot else over the couple of days, I made it through all 10 episodes. I mean, I think it was well done, and it did I think it did a better than okay job of sort of trying to get a look and explain why he did what he did. But as I was watching it, I kept thinking to myself, would this show have been as interesting if it would have been entirely fictionalized? If this was just created out of some writer's imagination? And I just don't think it would be. And I think the reason is part of I certainly wasn't or am not even still an expert on the case, but it's you sort of have a small idea about what happened going in, and kind of getting a look inside that story and trying to figure out why someone would do something so incomprehensible is probably, I think, to me and a lot of people, why it's more interesting than just watching true fiction. Or probably true fiction's an oxymoronic term, but just watching fiction.
Yeah, I think so. You hit on two things there that I think are part of what's compelling about true crime. One is this feeling that this is just a normal person who could be my neighbor next door, and something kind of frightening about that. In addition to, fiction, it's easy to say this could never happen. With true crime, you know that it did, and so then it could again, and so then there's an extra element of kind of danger or suspense in the watching of it. And then there's the imagination of, what is it like? And even you can tell by the titles of many of these serials that are broadcast, like it's Dahmer hyphen monster. Like how does a real person become a monster? And then, that hit show, I Am a Killer, like it invites you to go in to imagine what it's like. And I think there's a tendency to think that there's some access to the mysterious. There's something that people like Jeffrey Dahmer know. There's some insight into the world. There's some access to evil, which is kind of mysterious and intriguing that normal people don't have. I think that's entirely false, but it is fed by the fictions of, characters like Hannibal Lecter and Silence of the Lambs and others, where there's, like where the FBI keeps going back to him because he has an insight into other criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this is, it's actually false. I mean, what you have in people like Jeffrey Dahmer is just a lack. There's a deep emptiness in them. Their lives are not led forth by meaning, to access to any kind of meaning. It's a life that's driven by urges. And because it's driven by urges, there's no insight to be had, but there are certain things that they're feeling, of course. But I think the Hannibal Lecter series, that all is very misleading. And it's in some ways kind of a twisted, wishful thinking that there's some kind of meaning in evil that simply isn't there.
No, it sounds like you've not watched this Dahmer series on Netflix. Am I correct?
No, and I am not for a couple of reasons that we'll get into. I don't like the exploitation part of, of victims' families. I won't support shows like that. But also, I'm really not drawn to true crime. I love mysteries. I love mystery shows, fictionalized. I'm not drawn to true crime.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm not typically that drawn to it, and I guess part of the reason I watch again was I knew we were going to be talking about it on our show, and I also knew that it was just sort of the show a lot of people were talking about, and I had a lot of time to kill, quite frankly. But one thing that was interesting, and you just touched on it though, is that as the sort of in the later episodes of the show, there are people who are writing books about this, including Jeffrey's father, Lionel, who was portrayed by Richard Jenkins in the series, and I thought, quite frankly, was in from an acting standpoint, the star of the show. They even talked about in the miniseries about how it's wrong for people to profit on crime such as this, which was interesting because, of course, you couldn't help but watch the show and think that this show was doing exactly that. The other thing, and this doesn't quite make it made it gets a little better in my mind, was that sort of the underlying theme was how often there were signs that this could have been stopped a lot sooner, how often mistakes were made, especially by law enforcement, where this could have been stopped a lot sooner, where people like Jesse Jackson came into Milwaukee, and this was all, a whole episode was sort of devoted to this, and talked to the neighbors who kept calling police again and again and again, and nothing was done. So, I mean, I'm not sure that excuses some of the, quite frankly, the gross aspects of the show, which I think you could probably imagine, but it did touch on some of those points too. But I would just love to know and be in that TV writing room in a way of how you talk about people in the show saying how it's wrong to exploit and make money off tragic events like this when you're writing for a show that in many ways is exploiting and making money off terrible events just like that.
Well, I think the show's creators are just disingenuous. They want to build into the show itself like some awareness. They know the criticism that it's getting, and they want to ease their conscience, so they write in, ways of kind of some kind of social justification and awareness of it. But it's face it, it's the whole reason for the show is because it's going to make a lot of money for Netflix, and it's going to make a lot of money by being exploitative. And if it wasn't that, if it were, proposed because it was going to serve some kind of social function but not get a lot of viewers, it wouldn't be made.